Today's High Performance Podcast is brought to you by Josh Phegan Digital. It's the only place that you'll find our expansive resource library. Every form, checklist, visual and dialogue that you'll ever need to systemize your business. Available to edit in PDF to rapidly take your business to the next level. Welcome to High Performance, the podcast featuring Josh Phegan and Alexander Phillips. Alexander, we're going to talk today about the art of pricing. And this is a big conversation because obviously in different parts of the country we've got different legislation, but in Victoria we have a statement of information. Every property has to have a price on it and has to be given from day one. In New South Wales we have an option when it comes to auction about no price, a price guide or a price or a specific number. Yet in Queensland, if I go to an auction, I can't give out a price at all in any way whatsoever. What's your thoughts about pricing in the way that we go to work it? Obviously there's a conversation around what do you do in marketing? If you have the option of no price, do you do that in week one and then put a price on in week two and then step up the price potentially in week three? Are you in a position that you believe in, call us to find out what the price is? Like, what are some of your thoughts about what you've seen, what works and doesn't work inside of your market?
So Josh, obviously there's two different sides. It's where the vendor's at, what the expectations are, where the marketplace is probably going to end up at, but how you actually get them there. And in our marketplace, which I'm sure is across many parts of Australia, is we're 99% auction orientated. And an auction is, you've got to think about what an auction actually is. An auction is about, how I look at it, is drawing in as many people as possible, getting them emotionally involved and bringing them through the journey on price. And that journey can't start too high because you're not going to bring in those buyers and they're just not going to walk through the door. But there needs to be a point where you're not misleading, but you're also steering them very early on at where it might end up at. So you might have a certain guide price, but you might say, this is what's sold down the road or this sold next street. We'd love to see it get to sort of those levels, but at this stage we've had an offer at 2,450. It could end up at the one that sold down the road, which this one went for 2,700. You've got to also be careful it's within
the 10% range,
the legislations or whatever it might be. So part of it is making sure what we do generally is the guide price where it ends up at can be anywhere from 10 to 20% out, but by the time we get to that pointy end of the sale at auction or before auction, the guide price is within 5% of where it sells for. So we've slowly, and we explain to buyers what we're going to do, that it's going to be increased as a program goes based on offers, interest, and you'll be notified on that via text, email, our calls. You've seen that yourself, Josh, from going to our open homes. So they actually, when you explain the process, that they understand it. But the art of pricing really does, for us, the most important part of it is a set up to sell meeting with the vendor and explaining guide prices. And our open homes on the weekend average from 20 to 38 groups through the door, which is probably double what we would normally get, but also is mainly because we got the guide. We made a conscious effort to get the guide prices right, and already 40% of our open homes we've increased the buyer's guide, and now we've displayed the guide price. We always give a guide price from day one. We've got an automatic response system. We then generally display them within 48 hours or 72 hours. The reason we don't display it early on is if you've got a 4-week campaign domain and REA stats, 80% of the inquiries come through in the first 72 hours. So you've actually collected enough data to then push it back out with increased buyer's guides. So it's about explaining it. You got to explain it to both parties, which is buyers, sellers, and then you bring it together. And then that's how you create a great name in the marketplace, by explaining what's going to happen.
I think the big conversation is that, when you go to Google and you type in, say, Alexander Phillips and you press search, everything that comes up on that page is about Alexander Phillips. Yet if I go into the major real estate portals and I search a million to 1,1, anything that is inside of that search range will come up, regardless of whether or not the agents actually put a guide price published or not. So if you think about it, consumers can actually search quite quickly, and you'll see that if there's a particular price, when does it fall in or fall out of the search criteria, if they're going to try and guess it, if there's not a displayed actual price guide anyway. And this is the interesting thing, because I was having this debate with my dad the other day. Melbourne, probably one of the most successful auction markets in the country, highest volume of auctions in the country, and is in a position that it has legislation that requires a guide from day one. So it's not like it can't work. The difference is that you've got to make sure that you're very, very clear about what you're doing and how consistently you're actually doing that. So if you make sure that you've got a standard, like we know is that if you do not have a price, if that's allowed in your state or territory or country, then what's going to happen is that there's going to be a ton of inquiry. And what's the first thing you're going to say? Alex, what's the price guide? So you're going to have an answer on that, either based on recent sales, or if you're legally able to give a guide, like we are in New South Wales and Victoria, that you actually are doing that from day one and making that decision about how you're going to have that discussion with people. And I think that this is really interesting is that Alexander Phillips can't turn up to an open all of a sudden, something's just happened. Someone in his team has to go and do that open. Where do they actually get the recommendation on what that guide is going to be? And if it's published, it's really easy for the agent inside of the team to be able to go, hey, that's actually the guide price and the recent sales that we're referencing. So our job here is to understand that markets also come up and down. There are some markets where you'll set a guide and all of a sudden it flies like there's no tomorrow because you didn't see some market circumstances that were happening. Other times you set a guide and the campaign falls flat and the guide is revised downward because all of a sudden the market's not responding at that level. And so naturally, you've got to realize boom markets, bust markets, in-between markets, that it's always dynamic. And your job in terms of pricing is to make sure that you're clear and transparent with your owners about what's actually happening in terms of market conditions, what's influencing this particular economic cycle, whether or not it's interest rates or international stock markets or geopolitical events, or what's actually happening to the buyer pool and why all of a sudden there's a new level of buyer demand because that particular property is maybe architecturally significant or maybe has got something about it that was very difficult to price from day one because it's such a unique asset. The skill, without a doubt, in being a great agent is to make sure that you really know your stuff when it comes to what's happening in your marketplace, what's happening to pricing in your area, and making sure that you're consistent in your approach about how you go to use guides if you're legally able to.